Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative this great Thursday morning. You know, I just had my first COVID shot yesterday. I had put it off while I was having some other medical issues completed, and I got my first COVID shot, and I'm hoping that you're getting yours. COVID has uncovered, like, racism in America, what has happened to African Americans and Latinx and Native Americans. It really has uncovered the political, economic, health injustices all over. And today, we have Elizabeth Ryder, who we're going to talk about some of those injustices. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I have both my shots.
Fantastic.
Very liberating. Yeah, it's very liberating, you know.
Very liberating, and that's what we would like for everybody to get their shots and everybody to perhaps increase their life experiences, to be liberated, that freedom, total freedom. So, Dr. Elizabeth Ryder, tell us a little bit about what kind of doctorate did you get? What's your educational background like?
Well, let's see. I have my BA, MA, and PhD from UCLA, and it was all in anthropology and specifically linguistic anthropology. And I
what kind of anthropology?
Linguistic anthropology, which means studying languages. And so I studied for my master's. I did Native American languages, and then for my doctorate, I went to Papua New Guinea to do my field research.
Native American languages and Papua New Guinea to do your field research for your doctorate. And I guess you learn, when you say anthropology, that's like, I think it's studying people, the history of people.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You're studying the history of people through their word, through their voice, through their languages.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Language is very important in terms of cultural identity. And so especially the work with Native American communities, it's about preserving their language and their culture and their sense of identity. Speaking, an indigenous language is very much part of, preserving their unique identity and culture.
Did you learn the languages or just study them?
Well, many linguists are polyglots, which means they speak many languages, but you don't have to be, because when you study the structure of a language, you can, just ask the questions that are needed for the person to, tell you what they need to tell you. And you don't have to actually become fluent in the language. You learn a lot about it, and you learn, many words and whatnot. But becoming fluent in the language really requires being immersed in the community for a period of time. And linguists sometimes don't do that.
That's fascinating to me because I had trouble with English. Okay. I'm pretty cool in Ebonics, and then I tried to learn Spanish. I lived 5 years in Puerto Rico, and there most people spoke English, and it was very hard to practice it, like getting that immersed that you're talking about. But I did dream in it one night, so I felt like I could get that language if I studied it more, but I did not learn the language. And I'm always at awe at people that either can speak more than one language, but definitely that understands languages. I'm curious, what are some of the kinds of things you learn about a culture through studying their language?
You can't even express in a different language that are expressed, idioms and whatnot. For an example, I'm fluent in a language from Papua New Guinea, the most widely spoken language in Papua New Guinea. And, one of their idioms, which I always appreciated, was they'd say, "Pokpokis," and that means if you, "Pokpokis." It's a Creole or Pidgin, which technically it started as a Pidgin, but now it's a fully fledged language. It's called Pukpizin. And Bookies is when they'll make a square with their fingers, and it's like when you talk around a topic, you're speaking indirectly to a subject, talking all the way around it, and but they have this expression, bookies, talk around the topic indirectly. Yes.
So with that square, they're wanting you to get to the subject matter. Is that what they're doing there?
They're talking all the way around it, not, talking to it directly. And so you have to listen carefully to what they're saying. You know, how people talk around the topic and they're leading you to an understanding, but they're not just going directly to it. It's just interesting expressions and, vocabulary that just doesn't exist in the other language.
So all of your degrees are at UCLA in Los Angeles, so University of California at Los Angeles. I think of them as their football and basketball. How was it going to school there?
Well, it's a beautiful campus and a wonderful university and very, one of the top 10 universities in the country. So I very much appreciate my opportunity there. But the reason why I stayed in Los Angeles is because I was a business owner. My first husband and I, owned an auto repair business, and I was an auto mechanic from the time that I graduated high school, practically, or soon after, for 7 years. And when I started attending the university, I was an auto mechanic.
You were a grease monkey, a woman.
My life does not fit on one page.
So can I bring my car up and get you to fix it now? Is that what?
Well, cars have changed quite a bit. We had a specialization of restoring British sports cars because he had been a race car driver and had raced Jaguars, MGs, and CRs and whatnot, the old school ones. And we had a specialization in that, and I can still set up a Jag head and rewire Lucas Electric and. But, the cars have changed quite a bit, and now they're all computerized and smog equipment and whatnot, so I don't dabble any longer in the newer cars.
Okay, I had an MG midget once, but that's it. Okay, in the British cars. That is fascinating that already UCLA, undergrad, master's, and a doctorate in anthropology, particularly linguistic anthropology, studying language and getting the structure of a community, of a group of folks, Native American and Papua New Guinea, master's and doctorate. Okay, what did you get out of the study of Native American language?
What I was pursuing is that I believe that becoming an anthropologist would be equivalent to becoming an advocate for indigenous peoples. And unfortunately, it's not always the case, but that was my objective, was to, advocate on behalf of indigenous peoples. And that was my purpose in following anthropology.
Were you able to do that?
I'd grown up during the civil rights movement and advocacy and defending social justice issues were part of my DNA by that time. I had become a social justice advocate and an activist the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I was approximately maybe between 10 and 15 years old. Let's see, what year was that when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated?
I want to say 63, but my memory's not the best in the world.
Between 63 and 66, and I was born in 53, so I was barely a teenager. But my entire life had been a witness to the civil rights movement. And when you agree with something, you're watching it on television, you're cheering it on, saying this is right, yes, and seeing people marching in the streets, it's so inspirational. And you're glad that the world is going to be changing. And then he was assassinated, and the light bulb went on, which is that I can't just stand in the sidelines. I've got to do something. So that is how I became an activist.
So Dr. King was assassinated April 4th, 1968. 63 was the March on Washington, so I got that mixed up. Okay.
Well, and that's also when Kennedy was assassinated in 63.
Okay. So you were 15 in 68.
Right.
And I was 21.
Right, and
Okay.
I came from a white middle class family and my parents were conservative and racist. But watching this happen unfold in my lifetime allowed me. It gave me the strength to oppose that.
Okay. So did you grow up in Los Angeles?
Yes, I did.
That's home. Born and raised in Los Angeles. White middle class, racist parents. And you went into anthropology to study about indigenous folks, Native Americans, so you could advocate for them.
Right. In my family, in many, white settler families, you have a mythology that there's some Native American heritage. It's not always true. People, have mythologies in their family. They have stories being told. But the story was told in my family that my mother's mother was part Native American, which turns out she was not. But her great-grandfather had purchased land with a Choctaw land scrip. And so there was actually a involvement somehow in the family. So I spent some time researching that because I was interested. But that is the source of my fascination with indigenous communities. And, that translated after being witness to the civil rights movement that, these people were also oppressed. I mean, our society is based on stolen land and stolen labor. And, in trying to set that right again has defined my entire life.
Stolen land and stolen labor. And stolen land is particularly from Native Americans, and they try to put Native Americans in the plantations. They couldn't work, and then they went out and stole Africans and brought in. So that's the stolen labor with slavery. And
indigenous communities, had their own economy. They didn't need to work for land plantations, so they couldn't get Native Americans to work, on the slave plantation economies that did develop. And this also happened in the Pacific. When I did my dissertation in Papua New Guinea, they also tried to get indigenous peoples to work in their plantations, and they just refused. And they created all sorts of devices to try to get them to work on these plantations, but they didn't need to because they had their own economy, their indigenous economy. And so that's when they turned to the slave trade in Africa, because when you're attempting to oppress people, dislocating them is part of the formula. So disconnecting them from their land, disconnecting them from their social relationships, and disconnecting them from their spiritual relationship to the land as well.
So, Dr. Elizabeth Ryder, we're going to take our first break here. And so far, you just have a fascinating history with study of linguistic anthropology at UCLA, the doctorate, your master's, your undergraduate degree, all at UCLA. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about these oppressed people around the world that you have studied, and particularly get into some of the co-ops and the benefit that co-ops have for these people. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial. Information is power. That's why WL makes a great partner. We've been on the air now for 7.5 years, giving you information about co-ops. And you only get the power from information if you go out and use it. And we're talking to Dr. Elizabeth Ryder today about the knowledge that she has gotten through her life study of anthropology, linguistic anthropology at UCLA. And when we just left, she was talking about how a group of people try to oppress another group of people. And what you were saying, Dr. Ryder, was they want to move them away from where they live, take them away from their religion, from their people, from their language, and just get them immersed in whatever they want. Just try to eradicate their past.
My mentor at UCLA was a couple, Leo Cooper and Hilda Cooper, and Leo Cooper taught about genocide. He had actually fought against he was from South Africa, had fought against the Nazis in Europe, and then came back to witness apartheid in South Africa. And he wrote numerous books about genocide, and he documented the fact that there's a usual pattern, that they identify people, they make them wear some sort of emblem. In the case of the Holocaust, it was a star, but in the case of Cambodia, they put a certain colored scarf around their neck, and they marched them across, the country. They did that in the Armenian genocide. They dispossess, they relocate them so they're away from their social and economic relationships. And then, of course, when in the case of genocide, they murder them. But, these are common features. So you dispossess them of their social relationships, of their economic relationships. And finally, by moving them away from their land, you're dispossessing them of their spiritual relationship with the land. And that's the way that you can control people.
Wow. I get sick to the stomach whenever we talk about this, particularly when we go back and look at slavery in the U.S. and the taking of the land from Native Americans, the Trail of Tears, and relocating them, and murdering and raping and stealing from this group of people, with America never apologizing or never dealing with it. And that's sort of, I don't know what the original sin is, whether it's slavery or how they killed off and took the land from natives, but it's all right there in together to me of just really oppressing people. What was that like studying for you as a young person particularly? How did that impact you? You got the murder of Dr. King, which made you want to do activism. It sort of pushed that. You were 15 years old or so. How was it like studying that? It seems painful, is what I'm getting.
Well, you say to yourself, this is just wrong. You've got to do something. You've got to let people know. And so, as I spent many years becoming a university, lecturer and getting my doctorate finished. And the objective, of course, of that was to be able to teach young people the truth. And the truth about genocide, the truth about indigenous peoples, the truth about slavery, the truth about racism. I mean, you want to be able to communicate to people so that I had this idea in my mind when I was 15 that all that had to happen to eradicate racism was that my grandparents' generation would die and then racism would be gone. But guess what? That's not what happened. That they breed new racists all the time, and they do it, by teaching young people to be racist. But if you can, reach in there, before they're completely on board on that, and give them the truth, then you have a chance to eradicate these things.
They breed new races all the time. Yes, I really had that. I wondered, growing up in West Virginia and dealing with racism, being an African American, integrating schools in 1955, third grade for me, being called the N-word almost every day on the playground, particularly. But it's just like I wondered what happened to racism. All of those racists, after King's murder and after all of these things, and it looked like they just closeted that stuff. They were still breeding races, okay? Right. And the last president was able to bring that back out and made it so that people can talk out in the politically correct to talk about their racist views. And that's what's happening now. And we're going to talk more about that later on.
I had a very sort of intimate view of these things because my daughter being half Papua New Guinean, I got married in Papua New Guinea and I had my daughter. And so I had her in a school. After he passed away of liver cancer, we moved back to the United States. And I had her in just some of the best schools, anti-bias curriculum at a school on campus at UCLA when I was finishing my doctorate. And, I thought it would be the best environment. And yet, children would come to school and say things like, oh, your dad's a cannibal. Now, that's racism. So I, that's absurd. And they, mispronounce her name to become the N-word, Her name was Nishimoro, which means blue water in the Kuman language of the highlands of Papua New Guinea in the Simbu province, because people are namesakes in Papua New Guinea. So, at least in that cultural group. And, I'd have to go to the principal and complain about these things. And the principal would say, oh, that's just kids being kids. And I'm like, no, this is racism. We need to address this. And so, from a white person's point of view, being, having to an intimate sort of experience of it is quite a lesson. If you experience it every day, and I salute you, I'm so sorry. But, getting a white person to experience what it means is, probably the trick. It's what we need to do in order to eradicate racism.
So what was your daughter's name? Can you say that again? I didn't catch it.
Nish Moro. And that means nish means water and moro means blue. And as one name, it means blue water, but it also means blue horizon. But the main thing is that she was namesaked after someone that creates a godparent relationship and for an entire lifetime. So, it's a cultural tradition of the Kuman-speaking society in the Central Highlands of Papua New Guinea.
So that seems similar to Native American names. They take the names off of what I always thought the environment, whether you're sky or mountain or something, however you were born, but something that relates, has meaning to the name as Nish Moro. And so Nish Moro became Nikki.
Yeah.
Is that right?
When she got to school in the United States, she would say, people would say, "How do you pronounce your name?" Say, "Nikki."
Okay.
Because she couldn't pronounce it even.
So
and her last name is a type of tree. I got that from her grandfather, Okuk.
Okay. So you have experienced racism, particularly with the death of Martin Luther King at an early age, and then you married an African man?
He's Papua New Guinean. He's a Papua New Guinean political leader in Papua New Guinea. Educated. He was an independence leader. His name was Yambaki Okuk, and Yambaki means yellow bird of paradise, which is the national flag of Papua New Guinea. He's one of the key independence leaders.
So you were surrounded by the yellow bird of paradise and blue water. That's fascinating. Okay. Okay. Yellow bird of paradise and blue water. All right, so you've seen racism from afar through Martin Luther King on getting shot and all of the civil rights movement. You grew up with it. You saw racism in your home as a young person, and you believed that if your grandparents died off, then that would get rid of racism, but only to find out that they breed new races every year. So you wanted to tell the truth, so you said, okay, let me get my doctors and I can talk to you and train young people. How has that been for you, teaching?
Unfortunately, after the death of my husband, being a widowed single mother, I taught for a while, but, when you first start teaching, as a lecturer, they give you one or two sections. You may or may not have enough sections to have health care, and I took on the responsibility of raising my daughter, and I needed economic security, so I decided I needed a better job than that, and I went to work for the labor movement because, of course, that's one of the strongest organizations in the country for bringing about social justice, and I could get a job that had some economic security and health care for my family, myself.
So we have something in common. I taught school originally to keep from going to Vietnam. So I taught in Cleveland Middle School, and then I got a master's in math and taught in New York and then in San Diego. But I left it because I just couldn't make a living. I couldn't pay for me, let alone me and a family, with what teaching is. And that's sad because I really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy watching a young person where it clicks, where they finally, and I was teaching mathematics, and so all the time they didn't click. But once they clicked, that was the best kind of compensation, but it still wouldn't pay the bills. So yeah, I get that. So you went to work,
and that was my thing. Or get your health care. At that time, that drove my life. Getting health care, because you can be financially ruined by not having health insurance. So, labor unions are the strongest force for getting everyone health care. That's what they do. They get benefits and wages and health care.
So we're going to take our second break, and it's a good place to stop trying to get health care. And we're going to come back, and I want to talk to you more about your experience in the labor movement and what you wanted to accomplish in that world, being an activist now. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks, and the program is Everything Cooperative. This program is brought to you by the National Cooperative Bank, whose mission is to support and be an advocate for Americans' cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. And today we're talking to Dr. Elizabeth Ryder. And, she grew up in Los Angeles, went to school at UCLA, has studied linguistic anthropology, grew up in a white, middle-class, racist home, and took on to change the world. And she wanted to do that by the study of language. And we're going to talk more to her now about what she has been doing to change the world in her life. So where we left off, she had started working for the labor union. So, Liz, can you tell us about what you did with the labor unions, and what do you have as the purpose of labor unions? How are they helping those folks who have their land stolen and their labor stolen? That's the history of them. How does labor unions help?
Well, labor unions are when people come together to achieve a common goal, which is to achieve greater economic security, to achieve, the human rights, to achieve, all of the goals that they need in the face of an economic system that attempts to deny them their human rights, their labor rights, their fair equity in the economy. And so, yes, that I would choose, because it is one of the greatest forces in our society to change society. I wanted to be a part of that. They've been organizing for decades and decades, and they have, they're funded because they have membership and they pay membership dues, and they can achieve, so much. And so I had the privilege of working with the Justice for Janitors campaign in Los Angeles, where we got universal health care for the janitors, unionized janitors in Los Angeles by the year 2000, full family health. Then I had the privilege of working with the Healthcare Action Campaign with SEIU, and we're organizing hospital workers. So, as you can see with COVID, they're denied, they didn't have adequate protective gear or, principles, and many died. So people, organized to achieve the goals of getting health and welfare, health and safety standards. All of the things that have transformed our society, so many of them have, the outlawing child labor laws, health, all these things are achieved by the labor movement because they've managed to come together, pay their dues into a pool and use that to change those laws and achieve laws that protect those rights.
So my grandfather worked in the coal mines in West Virginia, and very big, heavy unionized. And my father did not. He said he didn't want to go in the mines. I didn't want to go in the mines. He worked on the railroad with heavy union. So I worked on the railroad a couple of summers while I went to Bluefield State College, and very heavy unionized. And then I worked for 9 months in an auto plant in Dearborn, Michigan, and I got a better sense of how the unions work. Because this white overseer, they call him a supervisor, but he treated folks on the line as if he was an overseer on the plantation, and he tried to get me. But the union, the guys, I was 18. The guys on the line, older, they stopped that line. And no, you're not going to treat him like that. That was a huge sort of eye-opening for the power and the benefits of union. And I love union. I have not worked in one since 18. Well, the two in the summer. So maybe since 20, I have not worked in a unionized place where I was a member of the union, but I advocate for unions because of everything you just said. How labor can have a real voice of how some of that profit can go to the benefit of the people that make the profit. The laborers?
I come from a 5-generation union family. So my great-grandfather was a police officer in Los Angeles, and his pension got my family through the Depression. My grandfather was an oil and chemical worker. He came to this area following the oil boom. My father was a state worker. He belonged to SEIU 1000. Myself, I've been a member of UPTI at UCLA, and AFSCME and, of course, SEIU, and also the IWW, because I a member of the IWB because it's such an enormous history of organizing, those that have the least say in our economy and the least equity in our economy. And my daughter also carried on the tradition and worked, with AFSCME also, and briefly as an organizer. So, it's a family tradition. And I'll put in there also that not all unions have over their entire history been anti-racist. There were episodes in the labor history where, white workers attempted to keep black workers out of unions. So if you really know your labor history, you know that. But now the labor movement is really a force behind anti-racism, and so proud of that work.
So I just would like for you mentioned, I think, about 3 unions in there. Can you tell us what those unions, who they represented real quickly? You gave the initials.
OCAW, Oil and Chemical and Atomic Workers. They represent the oil workers, so the refineries in Southern California as well as across the country. They have since gone out of existence, but in Los Angeles they've merged into the steelworkers. So Steelworkers Local 675 has inherited the tradition of the OCAW. They've been affiliated with them. And, you think steelworkers are steelworkers, but they represent the refinery workers in Los Angeles. A very strong union, very proud to work with them. They're an awesome union. Let's see, what other, UPTE, University Technical and Professional Employees. That's the union at UCLA. There's 5 unions at UCLA, SEIU and AFSCME and TWA and UPTE and Q, I think, that secure things like pensions and good working conditions and health and safety standards at UCLA. Yeah, which other ones have I forgotten now?
Okay. No, that's good. That's really good. Pensions, working conditions, health insurance, different kinds of insurance, salary.
Wages and benefits, yes.
Yep. Wages and benefits. All right. So you worked for 20 years or so in the union world?
About 20 years, yeah, over 20 years. Over 3 decades, the course of 3 decades, the 90s for SEIU and since 2000 for AFSCME. And just retired. So there you have it. There's the benefits, pension.
Okay. You got a pension. You got the benefits. So are you retired? Are you stopped working?
Yes, I'm retired, but I've not stopped working in the sense that I don't work for money, but now I just work. I work for in the worker cooperative sector, and then I spend a lot of time doing child care for my daughter because of COVID, she's having to work from home, and child care has been a problem for those women still trying to participate in the economy, because many have had to stay home and take care of their children. So
you're doing child care for your granddaughter?
Yes. That's
great work. Okay, I love that. Okay. So I just want to quickly tell people what a worker cooperative is. A worker cooperative, well, first, there are 4 types of co-ops. A worker co-op is where the employees own and control the business. So any business you can think of could be a worker cooperative if the employees owned the business and they control the business. Then you have the second type is a consumer cooperative, and that's owned and controlled by the people that uses the products or services. So that could be a housing co-op, that's your credit unions, that could be a food co-op. Now, a food co-op could be owned and controlled by the workers, a worker co-op, or it could be owned and controlled by the people that shop in the business, the consumer. Dr. Ryder, there is a consumer co-op in Madison, Wisconsin that's a health clinic. The health clinic is owned and controlled by the patients, and that's phenomenal. Then there's a purchasing co-op where a group of people or a group of businesses could come together and they buy what they need. There is a group, there could be farmers, the artists, Consumer Purchasing Alliance in D.C. is a group of charter schools and churches that came together and created a purchasing co-op, and they were able to get buy in volume and get better quality at a lower price. So that's a purchasing co-op. And the fourth one is marketing co-op, or they're called producer co-ops. And that could be its own and control. A group of people could come together. And farmers are the ones that use that a lot, Like Cabot Creamery is owned by a group of farmers, Land O'Lakes, Ocean Spray, Sunkist. But there is a marketing, purchasing co-op in Pittsburgh that I think you would like, Dr. Ryder. It's called Ujamaa. I think Ujamaa is the fifth principle
of Kwanzaa.
Of Kwanzaa. Fifth principle of Kwanzaa. And their name, Ujamaa, it's a group of black women that came together, and they are all artists. Some make jewelry, paintings, clothing, and they've got a storefront in Pittsburgh. You could go find them at, I think it's ujamaa.coop, but just Google Ujamaa in Pittsburgh, and you can buy online this product. I went there one July 3 or 4 years ago, and I bought all of my Christmas gifts for all of the ladies in my home, in my life, and I had only one complaint. The quality was excellent. My complaint was that the prices were too low. I said they may be good for Pittsburgh, but for D.C., New York, L.A., they were way too low for the quality. But it's a group of wonderful black women who've come together. Each individual artist could not have a storefront, but they can work there, market their goods, buy the products that they need collectively and get a lower price. So that's a phenomenal group of folks that's doing a marketing worker cooperative. It fits all kinds of different ones. But those are your four types. And you're focusing in on worker co-ops. And why did you choose worker co-op, particularly with this linguistic, anthropology background, union, being, you originally you were auto mechanic. I don't know if that played into how do you go to worker co-op? But how did you get into worker co-op? What's that like?
Well, so I've participated in cooperatives all of my adult life. I was a member of the Free Venice Food Conspiracy, which is a food buying group in Venice in the early 70s. I was a member of WEE Bruins, W-E-E as in small, WEE Bruins, which is a child care cooperative at the UCLA Married Student Housing. It's no longer in existence, but a wonderful experience. Again, women pulling together to take care of a need. But what I finally discovered was, and so I've been involved with cooperatives of all sorts all of my life, but there was a certain point when somebody pointed out to me that, and her name was Lynn Engelskirchen, by the way, pointed out to me, she was doing her master's at Columbia on worker cooperatives, and she said to me that the worker cooperatives are different because they are the only ones that return the means of production to the worker. In other words, they solve the exploitative relationship of the worker.
We're going to have to take our final break here already. Return the means of production to the worker. That's what I want to leave this segment with and take that back up. Return the means of production to the labor. And I want to get to what do you mean by that? Return the means of production to labor. We'll be right back. We can take our final break. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. We have Dr. Elizabeth Ryder on the line with us this morning. She has gotten her bachelor's, master's, and doctorate from UCLA in linguistic anthropology. She's worked in the union world for around 3 decades. She's just retired and been spending time child care for her daughter. But she learned about co-ops in a food co-op in Venice, California, and a child care co-op at UCLA. So she was telling us about that worker co-ops returns the means of production to labor, and I just really want to know what that means.
So there's an exploitative relationship. When you work for someone else, you produce something of value. And then that person, whoever the business owner goes and sells that product, and they get a greater value, and they retain the value, the difference between how much they paid you and what they sold it for, right? And that's where capital comes from. And that's an exploitative relationship because you're not getting the full value of the work that you did. So in order to eradicate that, in order to get the full value of the work that you do, you have to eliminate that role of someone who's skimming off the top The way to do that is a worker cooperative, which is that everybody that works there owns exactly one share. They have one vote, and they participate democratically, and everything is owned equally and decided democratically. That way, there's no person skimming off the value off the top, and everybody gets the equal full share of their work. So that's the design of a business that is non-exploitative. Now, unfortunately, some other types of cooperatives can still keep that exploitative relationship. Now, you take the example of an agricultural cooperative. You have the owners of the land that are marketing their product through a marketing cooperative, but what are they doing to their farm workers? The farm workers can be being exploited, and they most often are. It's only when you convert that farm to a worker cooperative that it would have non-exploitative relationships. So what I commonly say is worker cooperatives solve the labor problem. It achieves 100% workplace democracy. The entire objective of the labor movement is to create workplace democracy. And through workplace democracy, the people have a voice at work, and they can advocate for fair wages, fair benefits, health and safety standards, put in laws such as, eliminating child labor, whatever it is, achieving health care. This is how we do it. We get a voice at work. We get some modicum of democracy at our workplace, and we achieve these things through that democracy. But a workplace that has 100% workplace democracy is the goal of the labor movement, and that is a worker cooperative. So if we have an economy based on worker cooperatives, we will have achieved the goal of the labor movement.
So I got what you're saying. There's a organization called Democracy Collaborative, and they created a book called Cities Building Community Wealth. They gave an example of Christina, a Mexican-American who joined a worker cooperative. Before she joined the worker cooperative, she made $7 per hour in New York, and you cannot live on $7 an hour in New York. Even two people at $7 an hour, you can't live. But when she joined the worker cooperative, she went to $20 an hour. If she worked 40 hours a week at $7 an hour, then she grossed $280 a week. But at $20 an hour, she was at $800 a week. And so what she did was she lowered the amount of hours that she was working so she could spend time with her two children. Mm-hmm. So that's the she owns her own labor. She can have choice in the matter now, and she can have a better quality of life being in a worker cooperative and a better quality family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I get it. That's why I want people to know about worker co-ops, and I like consumer co-ops. I hear what you're saying about the purchasing and marketing co-ops. If it's owned by businesses that also have this exploitative relationship between the capital, one that owns the business, and the labor, they can still very much exploit the labor from everything that you're talking about. Got it. And we're talking about mainly worker cooperatives here and how to get more people involved in worker cooperatives. So you can have the experience that Christina had in these 7.5 years, all kinds of examples of people starting a worker cooperative or joining a worker cooperative and going from the $7 an hour to 20, 21, $28 an hour. It's phenomenal how they can do that. Because do you know why, Elizabeth, why it goes up so high?
Well, a capitalist, has you work 8 hours a day, you produce something of a certain value, and they pay you, let's say, 80% of what the value of that is. The 20% they skim off the top, and that is where capital comes from. That's where that income for the owner who does not do the work of producing the product, how they get their wealth, right? And that is the nature of capitalism. So what we need to do is change that dynamic so that people have control over their labor power, and that's in the form of a worker cooperative. I often ask myself, what would that look like? And what it looks like is a worker cooperative. Consumer cooperatives, food cooperatives, very often, and I belong to a co-opportunity market in Santa Monica, because that it was connected to the Free Women's Food Conspiracy. But being owned by the members, is the workers still don't have a say. And very often in these situations, even consumer cooperatives, they can be run just as corporate as any other business, and without taking into consideration, the decisions of the worker. So it's only the worker cooperative where the workers have 100% of the say. they have 100% workplace democracy. That's what our goal is.
So I've heard of some, matter of fact, I interviewed a guy in Seattle who worked in a food co-op that was, I think it was 40% owned by the workers and 60% owned by the consumer. It could have been vice versa, but it was in hybrid. And I would love to go and see how that's working. They had just formed that to both have the benefits of the worker and the benefits of the consumer, and how you merge those two together to hopefully have a even better environment, a better working situation. So tell me how this is. You're wanting worker co-ops, but what are you doing in Los Angeles to create more worker co-ops? What do you have in your mind for creating more worker co-ops?
Well, so, first of all, I did, a number of different things. But one of them was, of course, I wanted to go to the labor movement, because not everybody in the labor movement really understands the dynamic of what a worker cooperative is and how it fulfills the goal of the labor movement. They're immersed in their own work, and they haven't, learned about these things. And so I've worked quite a bit in trying to create bridges between the worker cooperative community and the labor community. So we founded Los Angeles Union Cooperative Initiative, LUCI.coop, in order to build these bridges between the worker cooperative movement and the labor movement in Los Angeles. So this is a pilot program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperative Union Council. I am the co-founders of the national organization, the Union Co-op Council of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. The website for that is unioncoops.org, and it's to nationally create the bridges between the labor movement and the worker cooperative community. So that's one way to, help this move along, is that, you have the people that are potentially your strongest advocates, which is the labor movement, that are unaware of the benefits of the worker cooperative model, and we want to make them aware. So, but then also I established WORCS, Worker Ownership Resources and Cooperative Services, and we are currently doing a project with Downtown Crenshaw. And our objective there is Downtown Crenshaw is an organization in Los Angeles which has built a land trust, a community land trust, to purchase residential and commercial property in South Central Los Angeles. It's an organization of the African American community in that area to stop gentrification, stop pushing them out of their home, in which for decades and decades and decades in Los Angeles has been the cultural and spiritual center of the African American community, and they're being pushed out right now by the sort of profiteering off of the LA, real estate market. And so they are trying now to purchase the Crenshaw Mall, and not having a great experience with that, because the developers, of course, are trying to resist that. They want to convert all of that into very high-end, very expensive housing. But this community is attempting to purchase the Crenshaw Mall, and we will be working to create worker cooperatives in the Crenshaw Mall and in the surrounding community that are owned and operated by the local community members.
That's fascinating, and I really wanted to spend more of this hour talking about that, but I got so engrossed in your history. It's phenomenal, that I'd like to have you come back on and talk more about what are the different types of co-ops that you're looking to create. So can we get you back on at another time to talk more about what's going on?
Certainly, but I want your listeners to please go to downtowncrenshaw.com and go to the petition, downtowncrenshaw.com/petition, sign the petition. If you can get an organizational support letter written, please do, and send it in to Downtown Crenshaw. Donate to Downtown Crenshaw. This is a monumental effort of the African American community in Los Angeles to survive, and we need to combat the racist and exploitative and profiteering of the real estate industry in Los Angeles. Please sign.
Go to downtowncrenshaw.com and sign up, please. We'll see you all next week, and we'll have Dr. Ryder back on at another time. Live cooperatively. Thank you.